us because it's not only my own work, which I will present here, but it's joint work with Corinna Frodermann and Andreas Filser, who both work at the Institute for Employment Research in Nuremberg, and I'm very glad that both of them also attend this session today and will also be available for questions at the end of this presentation. And as it was already said in the introduction, in this presentation, we want to take a look at parental leave take-up of fathers in Germany, and especially we also want to take a look at the consequences of these parental leave take-up of fathers for the mothers. So the title of the presentation is Fathers at Home Alone. And we will mainly take a look at two different research questions. We will focus on factors or determinants that can encourage fathers to take parental leave in the first place. And then we will take a look at the consequences of these parental leave take-up of fathers for the mothers. But before I focus on these concrete research questions, I would like to give you some brief overview over parental leave take-up in Germany and the legal regulations and the German context, so to say. So what we know for Germany, and I think it's very similar in Poland too, is that after a child is born, it's typically the mother who interrupts her career. It's typically the mother who stays at home with the newborn, while the father normally or often stays at the labor market, remains on the labor market and continues his career. And this in the end means, of course, that parenthood still often leads to a very traditional division of labor in the partnership. And what we also know from a lot of research is that, of course, these traditional division of labor in the partnership and also especially long employment interruptions of the mother come along with negative career consequences for the mother. They come along with wage losses, they come along with lower promotion prospects for the mother in the upcoming career. And therefore, there was legal reform in Germany in the year 2007. And one aim of this reform, of this major parental leave reform, was to strengthen gender inequality and to get fathers more involved in parental leave and in childcare, so to say. And in this reform, so up to this reform, we had the so-called Erziehungsgeld in Germany, which was 300 euros a month. And then this was replaced in the year 2007 by the so-called Elterngeld. And this Elterngeld took the Swedish parental leave system as a model, so to say, and it is a very generous income-related compensation that normally accounts for 65% of the former net income. And these 65% of the former net income are paid for a period of 12 months, and it is kept at 1,800 euros a month. And now the key element to get the fathers more involved was that these Elterngeld also introduced a daddy quota. So you can extend the 12 months of paid parental leave by 2 extra months if both partners take at least 2 months of paid parental leave. So this means there are 2 months that are exclusively reserved for the mother, and there are 2 months that are exclusively reserved for the father. And if the father does not take these 2 months of paid parental leave, it's just a take it or lose it principle. Then these months just get lost. So in the end, as you can see here, this daddy quota was, of course, really aimed at getting fathers more involved and increasing their involvement in childcare. And what we know now, 15 years later, is that this really happened. So you can see this quite nicely, I think, in this graph. Here you can see the share of fathers who took paid parental leave for children born between the year 2006 and 2018. And what you can see here, first of all, of course, is that before the reform, we found that only about 3% of all fathers in Germany took paid parental leave. And then with the reform, we have this sharp increase here for children born in the year 2008. We find that more than 20% of all fathers took paid parental leave. And we have an increase in these rates ever since. So for example, in our newest data point of this official statistic, we see that for children born in the year 2018, we find that more than 40% of all fathers took paid parental leave. Now you can think of this Elterngeld reform as a success story. So we have an increase in the involvement of fathers. But on the other hand, the other side of the coin, so to say, is of course that if 40% of the fathers take parental leave, this means that nearly 60% of the fathers still do not take any parental leave, and they do not even take these 2 months that are especially reserved for the fathers. So in the end, we have also a great but here, so to say. We find that the majority of fathers still does not take any parental leave. And what we also know from the official statistics is that nearly or about 75% of all fathers who really do take parental leave limit these parental leave to these 2 daddy months that are exclusively reserved for the fathers and that would otherwise expire. But of course, it would also be possible that mother and father split these parental leave time in another way, for example, 7 months and 7 months. And what we find at the moment for Germany is that most parents don't do this. So if the father takes parental leave, then most of these fathers only take these 2 extra months, so to say. And what we also know from very recent research for Germany is that additionally, those fathers who take parental leave typically take this leave at the same time as the mother. So they are not home alone with their children. They are not fully responsible for their children, but the wife will be there too, and of course will also support with childcare tasks and with housework and so on. So against, sorry, yeah, I see.
Yes, I have a quick question, if I may. So this 40%, is this the percentage out of fathers who are eligible for taking this, or is that all fathers? Because I imagine there might be women who are not employed at all or are self-employed, and how does this father leave taking depend on mother's employment?
So these 2 months for the father, everybody can get these 2 months. Also unemployed parents can use this 2 months. Then they have not such a high benefit, so to say, but they can at least get 300 euros a month if they take parental leave. So this, this
and what about inactive?
Also inactive persons can say, okay, but I would like to have my parental benefits. Right. So every parent can get these benefits, so to say. And then the benefits vary between 300 euros and at most 1,800 euros a month. But this really the official statistic for all children born in this year, how many of their fathers took these parental leave, so to say.
Okay, thanks for clarification.
No problem. Yeah, exactly. So we have these 3 great buts, so to say. And overall, we find increasing rates of fathers taking parental leave, but majority still does not take any parental leave. And against this background, we now wanted to ask the question, what factors can then encourage fathers to take parental leave? And if we keep in mind that most fathers only take these 2 months if they decide to take parental leave, we moreover wanted to ask, what factors can encourage fathers to take parental leave for a significant or substantial duration, so to say. So this is our first research question. And then, as well as it was already told in the introduction, we want to take a look at the next step and want to take a look at the effects for the mother if the father takes parental leave. And here we will focus on the employment break of the mother and her return to the labor market. So short-term effects for the mother, so to say. So first of all, before I talk a little bit more in detail about our research questions, I would like to present you, so to say, the heart of our project, and this is our database, because we have a really nice database which we can use. It's very unique and very new for the German labor market that we can use these data. And in the end, we use administrative data, rich administrative data of the Institute for Employment Research, namely the integrated employment biographies. And this just gives daily information on the employment biographies of all persons in Germany who are employed subject to social security, who are marginally employed, who are registered unemployed, or who are job searchers. So we have around 80% of the German working population. So really a huge database and a long observation period. We can see the employment biographies of all of these people starting in the mid-70s. And now so we have a huge database, we have a long observation period, and we have very reliable data, for example, very reliable wage information in this data set. So these are a lot of advantages of these administrative data. But what was a huge shortcoming so far is that when we want to take a look at these questions we are wanted to look at, so questions that are in the household context, the shortcoming was that we only had individual information. So we had no information on the household level. We didn't know if there is a partner in the household, and of course we didn't know any characteristics of these potential partners. And of course for our questions this is a huge shortcoming, so to say. And now we are very lucky because now we can use a workaround to identify at least married couples in this data. Yeah, I see another question.
Sorry to interrupt. Just a small question because I'm also doing research in Germany. My question is for those who are not subject to Social Security contribution, who are they, or how large the share of them for the total population, total working population?
Yeah, very good question, because who we cannot observe with this data are self-employed workers and civil servants. And in the end, it's about 20% of the working population that we cannot observe with this data. Of course, we can talk about this later on if we have a look at our data, because this is a very good question, and it's necessary to keep this in mind if we take a look at our results, because, for example, for civil servants, we can also imagine some different mechanisms maybe that work here. So we would be glad to talk about this, for example, in the discussion at the end, how our results might change if we could also take these people into account, or also self-employed workers who, of course, will also have other incentives to use parental leave or even not. Exactly. So what we can do now with this administrative individual data is that we can identify, or we can try to identify married couples in the data, and therefore we use the last name of all persons in our data set, and we used geocodes on the address of the persons in our data set. And in the end, our workaround is that we try to identify persons with the same last name at the same address, and then we can assume that these should be married couples. Of course, we cannot be 100% sure. To make it even more likely that we really identified married couples, we at the moment only take a look at mixed sex couples, and we only take a look at couples with an age difference of less than 15 years. So by this we can exclude, for example, father and daughter combinations or mother and son combinations from our data. And in the end, we can identify about 8 million couples for the years 2001 to 2014. And of course, we have to restrict our sample further. So we are only interested in couples that become parents. And we only are interested in couples that become parents after 2007, after this Elterngeld reform. And at the moment, we also only focus on the first childbirth, because we are interested in this point where a couple becomes parents, so to say. And of course, we can also take a look at higher order birth with this data, but at the moment, we focus on the first child. So in the end, we end up with more than 114,000 couples in our data. So you see, again, this is really a huge database we can use here. And for all of these couples, we can analyze their parental leave behavior. And what's quite important to tell you here is that with this data, we cannot only look at the paid parental leave, but we will look at the whole employment interruption that is connected to childbirth. So in Germany, you have this paid parental leave, which is at most 14 months for the couple, if both parents take at least 2 months of paid parental leave. But you also have the legal right to return to your former employer up to 3 years after the birth of a child. And both parents can do this. So both parents can also make an employment break of up to 3 years after the birth to the child, and then return to their former employer on an equal position. And you will see later on, if we take a look at our data, that there are especially mothers who interrupt longer than only this 12 months of paid parental leave. And so in the end, we think it's quite an advantage that with our data, we do not only have to focus on these paid parental leave times, but we can take a look at these whole employment interruptions that are connected to childbirth and should be the relevant factor also for the upcoming or subsequent careers of the people, not only the paid part, but the whole employment interruption, so to say. So before I tell you more about the 2 research questions, I would like to give you a better impression about our data. And what you can see here now is quite comparable to this first graph I showed you on the paid parental leave. But what you can see here is the share of fathers taking parental leave in our data. So not only paid parental leave, but all employment interruptions connected to childbirth. And what you can see here is that we find a quite similar pattern, so to say, as in this official paid parental leave statistic. So you can see here the total share, and we see, of course, again, this sharp increase in the year 2007, where the Elterngeld was introduced. And then we see a steady increase ever since till the end of our observation window in 2013. And we also showed you a differentiation for fathers who take up to 2 months of parental leave and fathers who take more than 2 months of parental leave. And which is also, what is also very comparable to this official statistic is that we again see that most of the fathers take only up to 2 months of parental leave. And for example, for the year 2013, we find that this is also 75% of the fathers in our data who take parental leave. Of course, what you can also see in this graph is that our share of fathers taking parental leave is lower than the one in the official statistic. And there might be several reasons for this. We can talk about this in the discussion if you're interested in this. We identified mainly 3 important reasons. Here at this point, I will tell you the most important one, and this, most of you probably already think this, is of course that we only take a look at married couples in our data. So we cannot take a look at unmarried couples, and we know that about 1/3 of all children in Germany are born in an unmarried couple. And of course, you can imagine that we have a selective sample with, or maybe a more conservative sample by only taking a look at married couples, and therefore the shares of fathers who take parental leave should be a little bit lower than in the official statistics. So this might be the main reason. Nevertheless, what I wanted to point out here is that we find a similar trend as in the official statistic on paid parental leave, and we find a similar share of fathers who take only 2 months of parental leave. And now what we now can do with our data, and what's really nice feature, so to say, is that we can also bring together fathers' employment interruptions and mothers' employment interruptions. And that's what we also did in this graph. So what you can see here now is on the x-axis, the duration of mothers' employment interruptions, and on the y-axis, the duration of fathers' employment interruption. And here you see all the combinations that we find in our data. And now the darker the color, the more frequent this constellation is in our data. And what you can see right away is here a slight clustering of people who make use of these full 14 months of parental leave. So of this full paid parental leave time in different combinations. There are some people where the mother only has a very short interruption of 2 months and the father takes 12 months. But there are also a lot of people where the father only takes this 2 daddy months and the mother interrupts for 12 months, for example. And what you can also see in this picture, and I think this is the most dominant thing, what we can see here is that there are a lot of combinations where the father only takes 2 months of parental leave, or where the father even takes no parental leave at all. And for the mother, the durations here vary by a few months up to several years. And this again shows quite nicely that it is very well with our data that we do not only take a look at this paid parental leave, but that we can take a look at the whole employment interruptions, because especially for mothers, we find that they not all return after 12 months of paid parental leave, but there are a lot of longer employment interruptions for these mothers in Germany. Now, what we also did was to sort these constellations according to their frequency, and this is this table over here. And what you can see right away is that the most common combination, or the most frequent combination, is that the mother takes 12 months of parental leave and the father takes no leave at all. This applies to about 80% of our sample. And the first combination, where also the father is involved, so to say, is that the mother takes 12 months of parental leave and the father takes exactly these 2 extra months, so to say. And this is in about 4% of our sample the case. Now, we thought it might be also very interesting to have a comparison to couples who completely divide these parental leave time egalitarian. So, for example, split up 7 months and 7 months, or 4 months and 4 months, and so on. And therefore, we also calculated for how many people we find a completely egalitarian division of parental leave. And interestingly or shockingly, this is only for 0.3% of the whole sample the case, so to say. So yeah, we are still far away from an equal division of parental leave in Germany, of course. Now, let's come to our first research question. What factors can now encourage fathers to take parental leave of a significant duration? And to answer this question, we really can use the full potential of our data. So we can take into account individual characteristics, but we can also take into account partner or workplace characteristics. And first, some words about the theoretical background and our hypothesis. So if we think about constellations that should encourage fathers to take parental leave, I think theoretically, based on previous literature, there are 2 main factors that come into mind. First, we have this microeconomic approaches, such as new home economics or bargaining perspective. And here we can assume that this parental leave decision is made in a household context, and that the labor market opportunities of both partners should be very relevant for this decision. And in the end, that the person with a higher labor market earning or higher labor market opportunities should, of course, work, and the other person should be more responsible for childcare and housework. And this leads to our first hypothesis, namely that in families where the father has a lower relative labor market chance or lower relative labor market resources than their wives, they should be more likely to take parental leave, and they should also be more likely to take parental leave for a longer period of time. So this is our first hypothesis. And the second hypothesis builds now on the idea that, of course, this decision for parental leave should not only be based on economic determinants alone, but should, of course, also be influenced by the context, should also be influenced by cultural norms and gender roles. And here, in the end, we can assume that fathers or couples who identify with more egalitarian gender roles, or couples who live in a context with more egalitarian gender roles, in these couples, it should be more likely that the father takes parental leave, and also for a longer amount of time. Now, let's talk a little bit about our variables and our method that we use here. So our dependent variable for this first research question is, of course, father's duration of parental leave. And the central independent variables are the educational relation in the couple and also the pre-birth income relation in the couple. So these 2 variables aim at this bargaining perspective, or this economic perspective, so to say. And then we also wanted to take into account a measure or an indicator for this cultural norms or for this gender roles. And of course, this is quite difficult with administrative data because we do not have any information about the attitudes or any opinions in our data. But what we can use is the regional context, so to say. So at the moment, we take into account the population density at the place of residence. And what's always very important for Germany is that we take into account an East-West dummy, because we still find that in Eastern Germany, the employment of mothers is much more common, it's much more accepted, and it's socially rooted, and therefore, yeah, this is also still quite a good measure for Germany to indicate this gender roles, so to say. We control for the usual suspects, for example, father's age, or also workplace characteristics like firm size or industry, and we can talk about this later if you are interested in this. And as a model, we follow the logic of a double hurdle model. So in the end, we think that this decision process to take parental leave for a father is a two-step process, so to say. We can also see this in our data that our dependent variable has a very skewed distribution. So we have a lot of fathers who do not take any parental leave, and we think this first decision is, or this first step of this decision-making process is whether or not a father will take parental leave, and only if he decides to take parental leave, then he will think about the duration, and this is the second step of this process, so to say. So to model this correctly, we will follow this double hurdle idea. And you can see what this means for our results now here in this first result slide about the educational constellation. And all the upcoming result slides have a similar look very similar. So we have here on the left-hand side always the predicted probability that a father will take parental leave, dependent on this, for example, here on this educational constellation, later on other variables. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the predicted duration of this parental leave in months under the condition that the father decides to take parental leave. So here's the first step of our model, so to say, so whether or not he will take parental leave at all. And here is the second step about the duration of this parental leave then. And what we can see here quite nicely with regard to educational constellation is that obviously it's highly important, the education of the mother is highly important. So what we can see is that we find the highest predicted probabilities for fathers to take parental leave if the mother has a university degree. And this seems to be quite independent from the degree of the father. And in our opinion, this means that we do not really find a bargaining hint here, but we see more or less that obviously it's more or less just the education of the mother, which is highly important. And if the mother has a university degree, then she probably expects her partner also to take parental leave, and she probably wants to go back to the labor market very fast. So this could be that, yeah, it's an expectation of the mother for her husband, so to say. And of course, it could be also more egalitarian gender roles in this couple. And yeah, this we have to take a closer look at this, but this is a result with regard to educational constellation that we see at the moment. And it's quite a similar pattern also for the duration of parental leave if the father decides to take parental leave in the first place. Now, with regard to income, we have two different variables here. On the one hand here in the upper side of this graph, so to say, we have the household income in 10 different groups. And below we have the woman's share or the mother's share of the household income. And what we can see here quite nicely is a pattern that a higher household income makes it more likely that the father takes parental leave, or the predicted probability is higher that the father takes parental leave as if the household income is higher. But it's not only a linear, but more or less a U shape, we can say. So for the very high income groups, we find that the probability is again a little bit lower. So probably these very high income groups are some special groups with very high incomes, and maybe the cap of the parental leave benefits is working here, and these 1,800 euros a month are not enough for these families to maintain their standard of living, or maybe in these income groups we have fathers in very, very high positions, and therefore they do not want or cannot take parental leave. They do not want to take parental leave. Of course, we should also take a closer look at this, but at the moment we can show you this pattern, and we are planning on doing subgroup analysis to take a closer look what income groups we are looking at here. Interestingly, it does not play such a role for the length of parental leave, it's not the same pattern as we can see here, but this is quite similar over all the income groups. Now, I think the even more interesting income variable is this women's share of household income, because here we can again take a look at this possible bargaining argument. And what we can see here quite nicely is that obviously there is an influence of the bargaining power of the father on the predicted probability that he takes parental leave. And what we can see here is that the higher the share of his income, the lower the predicted probability that he will take parental leave. And even more interesting, what we find here is that this is also not a clear trend, but for couples where the mother has really a high share of more than 70% of income, which is also not very usual in Germany, so to say, here we find that the predicted probability that the father will take parental leave is again a little bit lower. And we think this might be an indicator, could be an indicator for the doing gender theory, so meaning that a couple who already violates this male breadwinner model maybe does not want to violate also the gender role of moms taking care of the children and the father is not taking care of the children so much. Maybe this is a hint towards this, but again, we have to take a closer look at this group, because as I already said, of course, it's very unusual for Germany that the mother has such a high income share. And yeah, we also plan on doing some subgroup analysis on these special couples, so to say. So last but not least, I also told you that the regional context, or the gender roles in the context should be of relevance, and we tried to take a look at this using these indicators for the population density and for East-West. And what you can see here is, for example, that in large cities, we have a higher predicted probability that the father will take parental leave, as we would also expect. And especially we see that in Eastern Germany, that we find higher predicted probabilities that the father will take parental leave. And again, this is what we also would expect it based on theory. Interestingly, this does not play a role for the duration of the employment interruption, but only for the predicted probability that he will take any leave in the first place. So to sum this up a little bit, overall, we see that economic characteristics in the couple matter for the parental leave take-up of the father. We also see that the distribution of this economic characteristics within the couple are relevant. And we also see here on this graph that the context also matters. But now, what about the mothers? And this is probably for you all a very interesting question. Now, our second research question, so to say, is now, what happens or what are the consequences of this parental leave take-up of fathers for the mothers? And especially for her employment. And to take a look at this, we mainly focus on two outcomes, so to say. On the one hand, we want to take a look at the duration of mother's employment break, and also we want to take a look at mother's work volume when returning to the labor market. Why these two outcomes? Of course, we know that especially long employment interruptions of the mother come along with negative career consequences, so it should be highly relevant whether or not these mothers have shorter interruptions if the father is involved in parental leave. And work volume is also very important in Germany, because we see that a lot of mothers return to the labor market only in part-time, and we know from previous research that this part-time employment comes along with negative career consequences like lower promotion prospects, for example, or also lower wages. So this is why we choose these two outcomes in the first place. And yeah, again, some words about our theoretical background and our hypothesis. So first, with regard to the duration of mothers' career interruptions, here we use a pure rational choice framework. So we base our hypothesis on the economic theory of labor supply, and in the end, this just says that the decision to supply labor is based on a cost-benefit consideration, and that means for the mothers that they should compare the value of time spent on the labor market with the value of time spent at home, for example, for child raising, and they should then return to the labor market when the value of time spent at home is lower than the value of time spent on the labor market, of course. And of course, fathers' parental leave take-up should influence this cost-benefit consideration and should lower the opportunity cost of the mother to return to the labor market. And therefore, our first hypothesis is that fathers' parental leave take-up will lead to shorter employment interruptions of the mother. Moreover, we assume that this should be especially the case if the father takes more than only these 2 daddy months that are exclusively reserved for the father. So if the father also take paid parental benefit that is transferable between the parents, the costs for the mother not to returning to the labor market should increase, and therefore we assume that these association between father's parental leave take-up and mother's duration of employment interruption should be stronger if the father takes more than these 2 daddy months. And now some words about our hypothesis with regard to mother's work volume when returning to the labor market. Here again, we think that this decision should be based on a cost-benefit calculation, and more or less we have 2 arguments. We have a time argument that just means that if the father is at home and has parental leave, he, of course, ensures a full-day childcare, which is not so easy to get in Germany with institutional childcare, as they often has only short hours. So if the father is at home, there's a full-day childcare for the child, and then the mother, it should be more easy for the mother to return to the labor market in full-time, of course. And on the other hand, there should also be a cost argument, because if the father is at home and takes parental leave, of course, there's some kind of earning loss, even so we have this paid parental leave time, but still there's an earning loss by the father. And this should, of course, be another incentive for the mother to return to the labor market and to work longer hours. And therefore, our second hypothesis is that father's parental leave take-up will lead to a higher volume of the mother when re-entering the labor market. And again, here we think that this should especially be the case if the father takes more than only these 2 daddy months, but is at home for a longer period of time. So let's talk about our dependent variables here. I think this is quite straightforward. Of course, we use mother's duration of employment interruption as the first dependent variable, and the second dependent variable is mother's work volume when re-entering the labor market. Here we just divide between full-time and part-time work. And our central independent variable here is now father's parental leave take-up in 3 categories: non-parental leave of the father, 1 or 2 months of parental leave, or more than 2 months of parental leave. And for this estimation step, we use event history analysis, and I will show you the results right away. So first of all, with regard to the duration of mother's employment break, what you can see here is just a Kaplan-Meier failure curve, so without any controls at the moment. And this failure curve just displays for every month after childbirth the proportion of women who had returned to the labor market up to this time point. So we have here the duration in months, and we have here the duration of mothers who has returned to the labor market. And we have divided the group of mothers by our central independent variables. So we have 3 different curves depending on the duration of father's employment interruption, no parental leave, up to 2 months of parental leave, or more than 2 months of parental leave. And I think what you can see right away is that we find some initial hints for our first hypothesis, namely that mothers whose husbands take a longer parental leave than 2 months return faster to the labor market. So we have a steeper return rate to the labor market of this group of mothers. But of course, we also took a look at this by considering our control variables, and therefore we used a piecewise constant exponential model and estimated period-specific effects for 4 time periods, namely for the first year after childbirth, the second year, the third year, and then after the third year after childbirth, so to say. And the reference category are here mothers whose partners took no parental leave at all. And what we can see here is if the partner took up to 2 months of parental leave, we find that there's a positive effect for the return of the mother to the labor market, but we find this effect only in the second year after childbirth. And if we take a look at mothers whose partners took up to 2 months of parental leave, we find also already a very high positive effect for the return of the mother in the first year of after childbirth. So here we find the stronger effect right away, so to say. And this again is a hint towards our 2 hypotheses. Now, last but not least, let me briefly show you the results with regard to full-time re-entry or work volume of the mothers when re-entering the labor market. And what we did here was to estimate a competing risk model, and the event of interest is a full-time return to the labor market, and all part-time returns to the labor market are treated as a competing event. And what we have plotted here is a cumulative incidence function for this full-time return. This is under control of all our control variables. And what you can see here quite nicely is the probability of a full-time return in comparison of these 2 groups, these 3 groups again, so to say. So for example, we find that after 12 months, the probability of a full-time return is much more higher for women whose partners took more than 2 months of parental leave in comparison to the other 2 groups where the partners took no parental leave at all or only 2 months of parental leave. And again, this is a very huge hint towards our hypothesis that this parental leave take-up of fathers, and especially a parental leave take-up of fathers of a significant duration, so to say, makes it more likely that mothers return to the labor market in full time. So this was a lot of results that I showed you in this last 40 minutes. So to bring this together a little bit, we have a short conclusion, of course. So what we find is that with regard to fathers' parental leave take-up, it is socioeconomically stratified and it's also context dependent. But even more important, what we can see with our data is that the couple perspective is really crucial. We see that the distribution of resources within the couple is a very relevant determinant for fathers' parental leave take-up in the first place. And what we also see is that these fathers' parental leave take-up is positively associated with the mother's return to the labor market. And we see this with regard to her speed of return, but also with regard to full-time returns of the mother. But, and this is also very important, we can see this especially when the father takes a longer leave than only these 2 daddy months. And against this background, we must raise the question whether this reform really has the politically intended effect or not. And maybe you would like to tell your opinion on this also in the discussion. We would be very interested in this. And last but not least, some next steps we have this great database we can use, and we think there are a lot more things we would love to do with this database. Maybe you also have some ideas what we should do first, because yeah, we have a lot of ideas, but yeah, not so much time, so we have to prioritize in any way. But what we want to do definitely, and I already pointed this out when I showed you the results, we want to make some subgroup analysis regarding these factors that can encourage fathers to take parental leave. And what we also want to do is to take a look at potential time trends, because what we find in our data and also in the official statistic on paid parental leave is that more and more fathers take parental leave. And of course, this should also lead to changes in the composition of fathers who take parental leave. And yeah, we want to take a closer look at this. And we also want to do some next steps regarding the consequences of these parental leave take-up of fathers. And here we are very interested in long-term employment effects of the mother, because at the moment, as you've seen, we focus very much only on the duration of mother's employment break and her direct re-entry to the labor market, so to say. But of course, it would be quite interesting, especially with our very reliable data and also with reliable wage information, also to take a look at the long-term employment effects for the mother. We would also be interested in taking a look at higher order births, and this is something we can also do perfectly fine with our data. And maybe the most important point, what we want to do next is to take a closer look at the consequences of this parental leave take-up of fathers for the fathers themselves, so to say. So what does it mean for their work volume, and what does it mean, for example, with their wage development? And yeah, these are our ideas, what we want to do next. But first of all, thank you very, very much for your attention. I think